thank you, we might all be familiar with when we're teaching in our context, right? So one is that we really want to be able to distinguish core materials, right, that learners need to take away. We also want to do readiness assessments and design curricula that are sufficiently flexible to allow individual learners to engage in various levels of difficulty, right? We don't want to keep everything too easy. We don't want to make things so hard, right, that it's the challenges beyond where they should, be able to sort of reach to. We want to develop a motivation to learning. And a lot of you mentioned that in your statements about our role of really sort of inspiring was one of the words, guiding, developing that sort of desire to have inquiry and questions about what we're teaching them. And also we want to create relationships with faculty members, right? And I think this is something that we don't always think about, the importance and the quality of what is our relationship, and that students feel that they can, that they feel safe in the faculty providing challenge, that those types of critical learning challenges, as well as support and strong role modeling, as well as the opportunity for individual guidance. An assessment, when we're assessing those competencies, we want to do so over the entire learning continuum with benchmarks specified for the learner level. And assessments must go beyond what students and residents know and can do to address learner ability to identify the gaps and what next learning steps might be. Because it's an appreciation of those gaps that should drive lifelong learning, right? That they understand this is where I can continue to grow, right? When we're talking about the growth mindedness before. Next. So preparation. So this is something that, might actually seem challenging and difficult in the way that we have to work so quickly. Especially when we're teaching on at the bedside. And it might not always feel like we're ready and prepared to sort of cover everything that might come our way, right? Because it really depends on what patients are there. But preparation is very important for the success of clinical and bedside teaching. And how can we do that? It includes adequate planning and preparation that we can have as instructors and learners, and even the patient will result in much more effective learning experiences for all involved. So preparing for didactic teaching is something that we might feel even a little bit more comfortable because we can prepare that. We can develop teaching scripts. We can review physical examination skills that we plan to teach during that encounter prior to the shift, and allow us to really have a little bit more confidence in what we're going to teach right at the bedside. Educators should consider priming the learner for an anticipated shift if we're going to move from one sort of area of learning or topic to another before the teaching shift. And the instructor could work with the learner to set clear expectations and goals. And this includes, we need to orient the learners to the plan for the clinical teaching. Getting buy-in from the learner of what we're going to do today, and setting relevant and achievable learning objectives that we can take away by aligning our goals with the learner's goals. And so these are some of the ways that we can prepare one another as the teacher and as the learner to prepare for how we're going to learn together in that moment. In terms of modeling, the kind of professional, so we need to model, and this is, I think, really important, especially across all clinical activities, but I want to, as we move forward in these sessions, how we do so for substance use. We want to model the kinds of professional you want your students to become, right? Which is sometimes hard when we're tired and cranky, and trying to sort of sometimes take some shortcuts, but we're all human. But putting on your most professional demeanor around students is important, showing them what professionalism looks like. And I would say with substance use disorders, what does it look like to really sort of engage in very difficult conversations and issues of stigma, right? Where people feel very stigmatized around substance use disorders, if that's the topic that we're talking about. We have to be able to model that, because learners will emulate behaviors of physicians that they perceive as competent and professional. So we're the model, and instructors should capitalize on teachable moments and model efficient bedside history and examination skills and communication styles and respect and compassion and humanism. Next. And also, going a little bit sort of what Dr. Tyrell was saying, we want to have more of a Socratic or direct questioning, right? She talks a little bit about the why. But also we can ask other opening questions like who remembers one of the 3 methods of disposing of lab samples we discussed the last time, right? Which sort of engages them in the idea of recall. What can you tell me about cardiomyopathy, right? What can you tell me about opioid, addiction that we talked about the last time? What are the key things to remember from today's session in closing to be able to, really sort of really address, a summary and a reintegration is what I call it of what is actually being taught in that particular session. And those are some of the things. And there isn't just one right answer. There are a number of key takeaways that students may want to summarize, and they can learn from each other if they have a group and we're talking about it together. Next. And bad pimping. So I don't know if some of you have had experiences where people are just really pimping, giving pimping questions, cross-examination techniques that they're familiar with from TV shows in a bad cop scenario, sort of questioning. Obviously, that's not what we want to, offer to our students. We want to avoid that kind of questioning because we really want to focus on ways to enhance their learning, not just grilling them. So some things to watch out for are anything meant to trip learners up, right? That's not really the intention. We're really trying to sort of really coalesce with some of the things that we've been learning together. Anything that humiliates the learner, right? Or makes them feel stupid. Tiny, irrelevant details, because we're just trying to see, like, can they pick up every little thing? Arcane points of history that may not be as critical to what we're learning in the moment. Clearly inappropriate for the learner's level. It's just too high. It's just too up there. And exceedingly broad questions, right, that don't really sort of hone us into what we're learning. And definitely we don't want to do like read my mind. What do you think, I'm wanting you to answer? It really should be because some of these bad methods may really get students into more of a stress sort of frame of mind, and that really is not really helpful. They fear that they aren't preparing, and also we might use them, unfortunately, through our own anxiety because we think we're preparing learners for a work environment that's often quite stressful. And that's something that we often fall into medicine. That's how I learned. I learned under stress, has to be difficult. We have to be pimping everybody. That's how we learn. But please know that, it's really not very helpful for learning, even though we may feel like that's the case. Yes, so.
So I'm going to jump back in and talk a little bit more about some specific evidence-based teaching strategies. So again, when we say evidence-based strategies, we're just talking about a wide range of possible things. So I've just selected a few ways that you can use effective pedagogy based on what we know about teaching and learning, and hopefully apply it in a clinical teaching situation. And the first one's going to seem like it doesn't apply, but I'm going to bring it back. So the learning objectives. So we all know that, some of you have heard me talk about learning objectives over and over and over again. So I apologize if this is redundant, but we know that it's critically important that you're clear about what you want your learners to learn during each session. And it may be true that when you're teaching in a clinical setting, you're not going to sit down and write out formal learning objectives using this prompt the way we would for a classroom teaching situation, but that's okay. You don't need to do that, but you do need to have it in your head. If you can't quickly and easily state what you want your learners to know or be able to do at the end of a given session or a rotation, the purpose of your session will be confusing for the learners. So, think just think it through. At the end of today, I would like the learner to be able to, I hope the learner will get an opportunity to, or whatever. Just think that. It helps you and your learners focus the aspect of your session on what matters most. So, something else to know about formal learning objectives is that every formal learning objective has to have some form of assessment. Now, people hear the word assessment and they immediately think test or quiz or exam, but that's not the only way to assess for learning understanding. And for something like substance abuse, it may require a more robust form of assessment than some other subject matters do, where you can just simply use multiple choice tests. So, but you do need to know at the end of the day whether your learners are actually taking away and learning what it is that you hope they would learn. And on the other side, every assessment that you're using has to have a learning objective that's connected to it. It's not fair otherwise. If I suddenly start testing you on something that I didn't tell you you were supposed to learn, it really is a problem. So they're connected. So what do we mean by this? You just say, just to ask yourself, what is it I want my students to know or be able to do? And there's your learning objective. And then ask yourself, how will they prove to me that they know it or they can do it? And there's your assessment. So again, in a clinical setting, that might be again, going back to your great see one, do one. The do one is your assessment, right? You didn't have to write out a test. You watched them. They did it. That was your way of assessing whether or not they were skilled enough to do it. Another thing that we know is absolutely helpful and evidence-based is capturing attention. You can't get learning happening if you don't have their attention. That's the first thing that has to happen. So things like using a little humor, using a dramatic question, a case study, an example, suspense, and just plain old enthusiasm. All methods that can work to capture the learner's attention. Oh, I'm so excited about what we're going to do today because we have this patient that we're going to see, and it's really going to give us an opportunity to think about this. I know that medicine is a serious business, and sometimes I've sat and observed teaching here occasionally where people just suck all the joy out of learning by, beating the students over the head by how
Mm.
serious it is. Of course, it's serious. I think they know that. That doesn't mean you can't engage their emotions in a positive way. And engaging emotions enhances learning if it's done in the right way. And you can probably think of some examples from your own teaching or from teaching you've observed either as a learner, as a colleague, where someone was really good at using that, anecdote or story to really set the tone for the session. So, what are some ways you're using now in your clinical teaching to engage learners? Again, you can pop your answer into the chat or you can just unmute and tell us. I know that you've got all kinds of methods that you're currently using. So, what are some of the techniques that you can share with everybody here in this session? And I know it's getting late and you're getting tired, but I won't ever hesitate to call on someone, and I know some of you well enough to do that. Pair sharing and polls. Moving, excellent. Adjusting your voice, using humor, telling stories about mishaps. I used to, sharing stories. We used to have someone here who he would talk. I asked him to be a guest speaker a couple of times, and he always seemed to have some incident that had just happened that morning or the day before that was like completely relevant to the point he was trying to make. I always wondered, did those things really happen, or were they hypothetical or something that happened 3 years ago that he was still using? But he made it seem like, yeah, I was just talking to a family this morning about this. And it really, really was engaging. So again, all of those videos, people like an occasional video. Launch immediately by using opening questions or some other techniques. And, don't be afraid to use humor. to make that session more fun. Uh, you know, it is, I used to say, make it a parade, not a funeral. And yes, there are some types of humor you must avoid. You don't want any humor that, marginalizes people or is distasteful or makes fun of students. But, there is a place for some humor and energy around it. And of course, while you can argue the efficacy of any specific active learning strategy, there are literally mountains of evidence that show active learning has a positive impact on learning. This is about as settled science as anything ever gets in social studies. So it's particularly important when there's dense content, where unfortunately it's often abandoned in lieu of trying to squeeze in more content. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in another session. So another thing that works is retrieval strategies. So what do we mean by retrieval strategies? That's any strategy that asks the learner to retrieve information from their memory. So studies have shown, a number of studies have shown that students who take a simple quiz after reading material or hearing a lecture learn the material better, retain it longer, and do better on subsequent exams than those who simply do mass practice, rereading the notes or the texts before the exam. And in one study, learners were presented with Swahili English word pairs, followed by either by testing or review. And on a subsequent exam given later, participants who had been tested recalled 80% of the word pairs compared to only 36% by participants who simply studied without the testing. So, again, every time you retrieve information from your memory, you're strengthening those neural pathways, which helps students hold on. It also, again, reduces the illusion of fluency because you can't fool yourself into thinking you know something if you can't pass the quiz. So, what kind of retrieval strategies do we use? We've got tons of them. This is something that you'll sometimes see referred to in the literature as the testing effects. So again, this image is intentional. So, if you think about a child stringing cranberries to put on a holiday tree, only to find out that they're all falling off the other end because they forgot to tie a knot at the end of the string. So retrieval ties that knot. And repeated retrieval makes that knot really snug. So again, psychologists sometimes refer to this as the testing effect. Educators often refer to it as retrieval practice. We know that practicing retrieval makes learning stick far better than re-exposure to the original material. Again, mass practice. And it's more effective if it's effortful retrieval. So I know some of you have probably done Duolingo or some of these other learning apps. They use spaced repetition and retrieval practice all the time. And you may notice this if you've ever used them, that it moves on to another lesson and you're doing great, and then all of a sudden it throws something in there that it hasn't dealt with for like a few lessons back, and you're like, oh, what was that? I had it, and now I've forgotten it. That is intentional. It's in the design. Those kind of learning apps use the testing effect, retrieval practice all the time, and spaced repetition all the time. So, I'm not going to ask you to tell me because practice tests, weekly quizzes, paired quizzes, something that, flashcards, good old-fashioned flashcards are retrieval practice. And the good old-fashioned new retrieval flashcards are even better. Research shows that in the old-fashioned way that we did when I was a student and, dinosaurs still roam the earth, where we actually wrote out index cards, that the research shows that people tend to take the card out of the stack before they've actually learned it. But the algorithms that the online flashcard programs use make sure you really know that content before it takes that card out of the stack. Socratic questioning is retrieval, elaborative integration, asking them to summarize key points. What is the most important thing that you're going to take away from today's, session? Is a great question to end with. I already did all those. Another evidence-based method. What happened to you this morning, Dr. Popa? I want to hear.
You're just mentioning the Duolingo. I was
Oh,
coming back to your
that it
comment
hit
from
you
a
with
few minutes
something
ago
that
that just happened to me this morning, right? So
yes. So it hits you with something and you're like, oh, I thought I knew this, and it's kind of gotten rusty. Uh, we don't use space practice much in education because students don't like it. So one of the things I have on my little Kahoot test that I skipped over tonight is that you should know that some of the most effective teaching methods are the least popular with students because they require effort and students don't like things that are effortful. What I always say is, if you really don't believe me, go into a room of about 200 students and say, put your hand in the air if you want more quizzes. How many hands do you think are going to go up? I'm guessing zero. But we know from educational research that frequent quizzing is actually really good for learning. And I know right here at the School of Medicine, we caved to student pressure. And instead of weekly quizzes, we're now doing bi-weekly quizzes because the students said it was too stressful to have quizzes every week. So we abandoned what was good pedagogy to please students. And there's a happy medium somewhere in there. But often our best strategies are ones that students aren't necessarily going to love. Another method that we know is good practice is the think aloud method, and you may already be using this in your clinical practice. So in that, going again back to that old faithful of do one, see one, teach one, when you're see one, do one, teach one, I got it in the wrong order. When you're doing your demonstration, articulate everything that you're doing, say it out loud. And when you use some of these methods, like the growth mindset, practice sentences, and all that, it's going to seem really awkward and artificial at first, but trust me, if after you've done it a few times, it will just come as second nature. Well, I'm doing this, and because of that, and oh, let me check this over here because I want to make sure of that. And you say it out loud. Just say it all out loud. And then when it's their turn, to demonstrate they're doing it, have them do the same thing. Well, I remember you said to do this, so I'm checking over here, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that. It's a good method for them to develop clinical reasoning, and it can be used for you to see gaps in what may not be immediately apparent just watching them demonstrate. But as they're talking through it, you may realize that they maybe missed something critical for their clinical reasoning. Um, just the right amount of stress, right? The
Yes.
Yerkes-Dodson effect. Sometimes I just refer to it as the Goldilocks zone, right? That, too little stress, too little energy, and it's boring, it's dull, too much, and it's toxic. And toxic stress is not good for learning. It just puts people in a fight or flight syndrome where all they want to do is get out of the situation. But what we're looking for is that magic Goldilocks zone in the middle where it's just enough to keep it interesting. So
Mhm.
again, another evidence-based clinical practice is to be very practical, to be very relevant. So what practical bits of knowledge were necessary for you when you were taking care of substance abuse patients that you can now, those pearls, clinical pearls that you can now share with your student? What is the practical bits of knowledge that you need to bring out about a specific case to get the most learning from it? Those are important evidence-based clinical teaching skills. Provide, and we'll talk about feedback a little bit more later, but we want to, one important idea is to label feedback as such. Sometimes learners say they don't get any feedback, and the preceptor's saying, what are they talking about? After every patient presentation, after every patient visit, we talk about what happened, and I tell them you did this well. They don't always recognize that. They think you're just chatting with them. So I think it's just a good idea to get in the habit of say, I'd like to give you some feedback now. Is that okay? And when they say yes, go for it. But don't use that if the only time you give feedback is when they did something wrong. Otherwise, defenses are going to go up, right? Uh-oh, what did I do wrong? She wants to give me feedback. So Clinical teaching, of course, should never hinder or delay patient care. I obviously didn't really need to say that. You know, that we always know that the oath to do no harm takes precedence over any educational benefit. So you have to be, learn to be skilled at selecting the appropriate moment for teaching and minimize distractions for the learners. When I first started teaching here, I'm sorry, when I first started working here, and this is my first medical school, so the area where I felt least, comfortable was in clinical teaching, which is why I always ask clinicians like Dr. Fortuna to co-teach these clinical sessions with me. And I had someone come to me with a problem, which was they had intervened because they saw the patient was in distress and the student was very offended. So I had to go around to a lot of clinicians and say, how do you handle this? And almost everybody told me the same thing. I warn the student in advance that there may be times when I have to step in and take over because, a lot of people struggle with this procedure or whatever reason you might have to step in. So I always warn them in advance. And it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It's just that I see that the patient is uncomfortable and would like me to step in, etc. So again, in a busy clinical environment, you have to sometimes remind learners that interruptions are going to occur, that patient care is always going to take precedence over your teaching, and that it falls on both the learner and the instructor to revisit any interruption. And it also is part of their job to learn as much as they can, even when you have to focus on patient care and not directly on teaching. They should be learning during those times. And one of the most important lessons they are learning right now is when it's important to put the patient at the center of the equation. Also, we know that you cannot learn and be perfect at the same time. When mistakes are welcomed, learning is enhanced. And I had faculty members say once when it came up in my session, someone said, well, what if I don't know the answer to a question a student asks me? And my answer was, well, you just tell them that, right? And somebody in one of the preceptors in the audience said, I would never say that. I would never tell a student I didn't know something because I think they would lose respect for me. And if I, again, when I'm doing this face to face, I always say, what do you think about that? But I can see Dr. Woods is just shaking her head. That's horrible, right? That's horrible. No wonder so many doctors have a God complex. So I would argue that in medical teaching, it's even more important that you admit to not knowing something because it's dangerous to set up a culture where you can't admit that you don't know something. Imagine a resident who's afraid to admit that they forgot something or don't know something and now is afraid to admit that and afraid to ask. So, it's also terrible teaching because no one can know everything about every subject. So you're modeling lifelong learning when you say, you know what, that's a really great question. I don't know the answer. Let's figure it out. So it's a good opportunity yes, it's a great opportunity, Dr. Popa, to role model that lifelong learning, the fact that, nobody's an expert at everything, and that medicine moves so fast that even if you're the most brilliant person on earth, there's still new stuff coming out all the time that you may not have looked into yet. So it's okay. Plus, I'll just add this one more thing, and we're almost out of time. But body language doesn't lie, and students can read it from a mile away when you're, shining them on. I honestly believe students are more likely to lose respect for you if they feel like you're not being honest and you're just making up an answer. That will actually cause them to lose respect for you faster than just admitting you don't know. The last one is reflection. That's critical for learning. And I would say, especially in this subject area where you're touching on a lot of very sensitive issues. And we were in that book club the other day, Dr. Portia and Dr. Fortuna and I were both in it. And several people mentioned having family members who have experienced this. And I was thinking to myself, I bet there's not a single person in this room that hasn't had this experience with a friend, a loved one, a family member with some form of substance abuse. I know it's happened in my own family. So I think that, it can be triggering to touch on some of these issues. So it's helpful to allow the learners opportunity. And even very advanced learners, I had residents tell me that one of the things that they really struggle with is they don't have time to process. They don't have time to process their learning. They don't have time to process their emotions. And giving a little bit of reflective time is extremely important. And I'm going to skip over the summary because we're running short on time and I want to get to my advertisements. So hang with me for just one more minute. Next time, our next session is Wednesday, June 11th, and that topic is From Stigma to Solution, Best Practices for SUD Care and Education. And I also put in here the flyer for all the sessions, but the printing was so small, I wasn't sure you were going to be able to see it. So I just put all the dates here, and we can, of course, send you this flyer. But in addition to this great program, the Office of Faculty Development has some other programs that I wanted to tell you about. We have a mentoring workshop coming up on the 8th of May with Dr. Alina Popa, who, Dr. Popa, you might have heard of her. She's going to be talking about mentoring, and she's a great speaker. We also have our Thought Leaders Retreat coming up on May 29th, which I'm sure some of you are tired of hearing about because Dr. Ho and I keep mentioning it like at every single meeting. It's really a valuable experience, and I would really encourage you, if you want to know more about what's going to happen there, to reach out to me or Dr. Ho or Dr. Popa, who's going to be speaking at that retreat. And then our next Culture and Academic Medicine series is in June, and it is coming up. That will be a virtual session, as will the mentoring workshop. The Visionary Pathways, the Thought Leaders Retreat is face-to-face on the Ed campus. And one last ad, which is we are in active recruiting mode right now for the Teaching Excellence Academy. And if you aren't familiar with what it is our flagship program where the very best educators come together in a small group. It's competitive, some years highly competitive. You have to be nominated, you have to be selected by a committee to join this group. It's a learning community approach where we get together and we take a very deep dive into teaching and learning, far more than we can cover in like a 90-minute workshop or a 1-hour workshop. And we do have a member of the team right here with us tonight. Dr. Fortuna is in this year's cohort. We're very, very pleased to have that. The applications are accepted year-round, but we're in active recruiting right now. The next round starts in September. So the committee will be looking at, yes, to answer your question, yes. While it's primarily designed for people I forgot Dr. Osei, you were in the room too. Dr. Osei was in our very first cohort. So thank you. She's a big member of our team. We say team, which means Teaching Excellence Academy member. That's why we call it the TEA. So I could use that acronym. So the committee will be getting together and reviewing applications pretty soon. So if you want more information, please reach out. Not just to me. Every member is on the website. You can talk to anybody who's taken this program and ask them what they feel they got out of it. And I just want to say again, thank you to Dr. Fortuna for co-teaching tonight's session with me. And thank you for making me part of this program. It's such an important topic. And thank all of you for coming tonight. And now I want to stop sharing and open it up for any comments or questions in the few minutes that we have remaining.
And I was just going to ask too, Jose, were we going to have the little post thing sent out or, oh yeah, there it is. If while we're having our discussion, if you could go to the post event survey in your chat, we're trying to make sure we're evaluating how each of these sessions are going and impacting as we progress through them, especially with this initiative with the SAMHSA PATH intervention. So I appreciate if you could do that. Okay, but we're questions. I think we're comments.
Can you say a little bit more about what the next 5 sessions will be? Preview the content,
Yeah,
keep people wanting to come back.
Yeah, so people, I hopefully everyone will come back. So we have 6 sessions and we showed the dates, and they are going to focus on things like so we're going to focus on from stigma to solution. So really looking at, how can we really address those issues of stigma and engaging with patients, especially around issues of substance use disorders, things that we might all be experiencing ourselves in terms of bias and stigma, as well as our patients and who we're providing care for. In session 3, we're going to look at a little bit more on strategies for inclusive and culturally responsive teaching in substance use disorders. In 4, navigating the tough stuff. So you see there's a lot of things around the process and engaging in sort of environments that we really can promote learning in all the ways that we've talked about today. But in session 4, we're looking at some tough issues in helping in terms of substance use care in medicine. Teaching that resonates is really around designing further interventions of engaging us all in substance use care sessions for medical education. And then in session 6, assessing without bias. And that's going to really looking at sort of how do we assess tools for fair and equitable evaluation, also of our learners and how they're doing with substance use disorder care. And I gave a little hint that throughout those sessions, we're going to hopefully sort of engage each other in sort of sharing, some of the ways that we have found have been really effective and questions we have in our own teaching. And I might encourage people to sort of bring some challenging situations they've had, right? And how they were able to handle that, so that we can learn from each other. And as Dr. Tyrell was saying, we can learn from even our mistakes and as well as our the things that we've done well. And how can we sort of use that to teach our students?
I just put the list of stuff up there while you were explaining them, just so people could see the titles again.
Is it possible to send a calendar invitation? I think we can if whoever registers, they could probably get a calendar invitation, right? That they can download.
Yeah. Yes, and just give us a shout and we can absolutely send you calendar invitations.
And then
there's the registration link. Oh, I also had it on the slide, but I may have, because I was in a hurry, I may have gone past that slide a little too quickly. Let me put it up there one more time.
So it's there, and in the chat, you can already click on the registration for session 2.
It's on the slide. Feel free to email me. Thank you so much, everyone. Right. Any other questions?
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for being with us and sticking with it, and look forward to the next session. Hopefully to see you there.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Lovely evening.
Yes.